start by telling you a story of a woman who was out shopping at a department store one day, and she goes over to the clerk, and she asks the clerk for some help. She said, "Can you help me? I'm interested in these blankets. They're way up there on the shelf. Can you get one down for me?" And so the clerk says, "Sure." And the clerk goes and gets one of those little step ladders they have, pushes it over, climbs up, gets the blanket down, and pulls it down, hands it to the woman. The woman kind of flips through the layers of the blanket, and well, she's not satisfied. So she says, "Can I see another one?" And the clerk says, "Sure," and gets up on the ladder and pulls down another blanket and hands it to the woman. And the woman looks through it, and well, she's still not satisfied. And she says, "Can I see another one?" And this goes on, and the clerk gets her like 4 or 5 blankets. And finally, the clerk gets up and hands her down a 6th blanket, and the woman's looking at it, and the clerk's like, "There is one more up there if you'd like to see it." And the woman's like, "I'm not going to buy one today. I'm just looking for a friend." At which point, the clerk, having lost all patience, said, "Well, if you'd like me to get that last one down there, you can look through it and see if your friend's in that one too." Yeah, thanks. I always depend on 1 or 2 people to it, yeah. But I tell that story because it shows how quickly we can lose our patience with people, right? It doesn't take a lot for some of us to lose patience. I had an incident this week as I was meditating on this scripture to write this sermon this week. I got home and I was in my driveway on the flat surface, not in a drift, just on the driveway, and the thing would not move anywhere. I could not get it to move. It was because there was just ice under the tires. And it was like I wasn't stuck in anything. It just would not go anywhere. And I got so angry, I just completely lost our patience with the situation. We lose our patience. We lose our patience with technology, right? When our computers or our phones or our tablet computers aren't working right, we lose patience. I cannot tell you how many times I've wanted to take the printer here at church and throw it out the door. Not this one, but the one we used to have. I was so glad when that thing ran out of its life because, it never worked right. Judy can tell you. But then we lose patience with that. We lose patience with people, don't we? When we're driving on the road, we lose patience. We lose patience with our children, our grandchildren, our parents. We lose patience all the time. And all those things are important things, and we need to work on them because the scriptures tell us patience is a fruit of the Spirit. If God is working in our lives, we are working on those things to have patience in those situations. But what I want to look at today is not those individual things that we can lose patience with, but I want to look at a big thing. How so often, maybe always, we lose patience with God and what He is doing. And what I mean is, we are told in the scriptures, hey, God's got a plan. God's got a plan to work things out for good, and He's going to plan to work out to bring glory to Himself, and He's got a plan to take care of His children, His followers, that's us. He's got a plan, and His plan, He's got this plan in which evil fails and good will prevail. But we're also told it's going to happen in God's time. God's got His own timetable, and it's not usually our timetable, is it? God's ways are not our ways. And so we are told, be patient. Wait on God to work it out. Wait on God to work in you. And that's fine, except while we're supposedly being patient, life goes on, right? And life's not always fair. It's not always easy. And we're kind of stuck right where we are right now. And maybe that's where God wants us, but we want to be up ahead somewhere, right? Because it's hard where we are sometimes. And God says, that's where you need to be. Because we can imagine a place out there in the future where, we've accomplished whatever we want to accomplish, or things are better, or we're living the righteous life, and we want to get there now. But God says, well, wait for my timing. I need you to live the righteous life as I work in you, as I build you up, as I teach you. I know it's hard sometimes, but don't get ahead of me. That's what God tells us, but all too often for us, that's not enough. We lose patience with God, and we take things in our own hands. We start doing things our way, and we learn real fast that has disastrous consequences when we get impatient with God and we start living things out our way. We learned this lesson from the Israelites, who we've been talking about. They become impatient with God, and they become impatient living life God's way. And so they start just doing things their way, and they pay a heavy price for it. Now, we've been talking about the Israelites in this church for the past couple weeks, the ancient Israelites, as they were slaves in Egypt. And they cried out to God for help, and God helped them. He sends Moses, and through Moses, God does a series of miraculous things that causes their Egyptian slave masters to tell the Israelites, get out. So the Israelites, they leave slavery as free people. And you might think at this point, all right, now that they're free from slavery, God's going to keep his promise, the promise he made to his ancestors to bring these people into the promised land, a fruitful land, a prosperous land. And God is going to keep that promise, just not yet. See, he's got his own timetable. And God says, so the people of Israel, you're not ready yet. I need to teach you some things. There are some things you need to know about holy living. So God doesn't take them right into the promised land. He tells Moses, all right, Moses, follow me. And so God, through Moses, leads the people into a desert. And they kind of wander around the desert for a while. And God eventually leads them to the base of this mountain, Mount Sinai. And he says, stay here for a while, make camp here. And he says, I'll tell you what, Moses, you come up to the top of the mountain and you talk with me. Moses, I'm going to give you some regulations and laws to give to the people for holy living. And Moses, only you come up, unless I tell you specific names of people to bring with you, nobody else approaches the mountain. No one comes near it. They stay down at the base. And so Moses tells the people of Israel, this is what God has said. And they're like, all right. So no one goes near the mountain. But Moses goes up, and he comes down. And several times Moses goes up the mountain and comes down. And each time he goes up, God tells Moses a little bit of the laws or regulations, or God gives Moses some information. One time Moses goes up, and God gives Moses what we now call the 10 Commandments. He said, Moses, here are these 10 laws. And Moses, like he always does, he goes down, and he tells the people, this is what God says. And he tells them the 10 Commandments. Anyone here know what the first 2 commandments are? Number 1, have no other gods. No, I'm God. Number 2, do not make or worship an idol that you make with your hands. Do not do it. Verse 2, I bring those 2 out because they'll be important as we go through our narrative here. But Moses goes and he tells them these things God says each time. And each time the people of Israel say, yeah, we're going to do it. We're going to listen and do everything the way God tells us to, Moses. And so everyone's happy. Well, eventually God calls Moses up to the mountain again. And so Moses goes. And the people down at the base of the mountain, they wait. And they wait. And they wait more than just a few hours. They wait more than just a few weeks. In fact, the Bible tells us when Moses does eventually come down, he had been up on the mountain for 40 days. Now, I want you to picture this. You are the people of Israel. You followed this guy, Moses. He did some pretty cool things. So you followed him, and you follow him right out to this desert, and you're at this mountain in the desert, and then he leaves to go up on top of the mountain. He doesn't come back. And there's no indication that he is coming back. And there's been no further instruction. How long do you wait? How long do you keep your patience? See, we don't wait long, do we? Before we start taking things into our own hands, I got thinking this week about when I was in college. Every 2 or 3 weeks, my mom would come pick me up on campus and bring me back home for the weekend. And it was set up in such a way that about 4 or 5 miles away from campus, there was a convenience store. So when my mom was on her way, she'd get to that convenience store, and she'd stop there, and she'd call me on the payphone way back in the day, before everyone had cell phones. And she'd say, hey, I'm at that convenience store, so be waiting for me. So I'd say, okay. And I'd hang up, I'd just grab my bag, and I'd go out to the dormitory stairwell and wait for her, because out the window of the stairwell, I could see across the river to the road on the other side coming down into town, and I could see her car when she came past. And so I knew when I saw her car, it would only be a couple more minutes. She'd have to cross the bridge and then drive up onto campus, and she'd be in the parking lot. So I'd know when she was coming. But I'd go out there in the stairwell, and I'd wait, and I'd watch, and I'd wait, and I'd watch. And many of you know me, I'm not a patient person. And I'd be like, this is taking too long. I must have missed her car. So I'd go down the whole way to the stairwell, I'd go out the door, and I'd look in the back parking lot in the dormitory, and my mother wouldn't be there. So it's like, well, I'll go up and watch some more. And I'd watch, and I'd watch. It's like, well, she must have driven past when I went down before. so I'll take this in my hands again. I'll go down and look. And she wouldn't be there. And so I'd have to go by. Eventually, her car would come down the hill, and I'd see it, and there it would be. But I'd be like running back and forth, doing extra work because I was impatient, and I was trying to take things into my own hands. How long do we wait? We're not people who like waiting, are we? And it's the same way with the Israelites. How long before we get impatient with doing things God's way? How long before the Israelites get impatient here, waiting for God, waiting for Moses, living life God's way? And they're probably more patient than me, because it seems that they make it almost the full 40 days, it seems. But eventually, they get impatient. And so they come to Aaron, Moses' brother, Moses' right-hand man, and they say to him, Aaron, what's happened to this Moses guy? I think it's obvious he's not coming back. And he was our leader. We need someone to follow Aaron. We need to follow something. So Aaron, why don't you make us gods for us to follow? And Aaron, being the pious, devout follower of God that he was, he says, sure, bring me your gold. And they bring him their gold, and he fashions it into the form of this calf. And he gives it to the people, and the people love it. And they say, oh, these are your gods, O Israel, who brought you up out of Egypt. Wait, this calf just appeared here. We were brought out of Egypt before. But all right, this is our God. And Aaron, being the pious, devout follower of God that he was, he says, all right, great. I'm going to build an altar for worshiping this gold calf. And then Aaron, being the pious, devout follower of God that he was, says, tomorrow's going to be a religious holiday. And we're going to have a religious holiday for worshiping the gold calf. And so the people come the next day, and they bring all sorts of sacrifices and all sorts of offerings for worshiping the gold calf. Now pay attention to what has happened here. The people of Israel, they became impatient with God. They became impatient with waiting for God, and they became impatient living out life the way he had told them in the meantime. And they followed that impatience right into sin, right into disobedience, right into idol worship. Now remember, they had told Moses, we will do everything exactly as God says. And remember, God gave them the 10 commandments. And remember the first 2 commandments. No other gods, and do not make and worship idols. Didn't take them long, did it? And so the people of Israel, they do the same thing we do today, don't they? They become impatient living God's way and waiting for God to work things out. And so they start living whatever way they want, whatever way seems best for them, because this is the quickest way to fulfillment for them. So they end up worshiping an idol made by human hands, and they offer it sacrifices, and they then allow this false worship to lead into revelry. That's what it says. It says the people eat and drink, and then they get up to indulge in revelry. Now, what's revelry? It is singing, it's dancing, it's music, all right? But there's an undercurrent here of sexual immorality. It doesn't take them long to become like all the other peoples around them. And so they become base and immoral, and they become a laughingstock to all the other people groups who live around the area, who hear what those Israelites have gone out and started doing in the desert. God's chosen people. They become a stain to God's name. They become a stain to God's glory. Meanwhile, back on the mountaintop, God's been there talking to Moses, giving Moses some guidelines for the people for holy living. And God says, because God, he might have been talking to Moses, but he's fully aware of what's going down here in the Israelite camp. And he says, Moses, you need to get down there and see what your people have done. Hasn't taken them long to become impatient and stop following me, Moses. And God kind of cues Moses in on what's been happening. And so Moses goes down and he sees what the people are doing. And he becomes angry. Righteous anger just burns in him. To the point where God has given him 2 stone tablets with some of the laws written on it, and he just throws them and smashes them. He's so angry. And then he takes the gold calf. He loses no time. He takes the gold calf, throws it in a fire, then brings it out and grounds it down into dust. And then he sprinkles that dust all through some water, and he makes the Israelite people drink it. Now, have you ever had water with too much iron? What do you do when you get water with too much iron? Yeah, you all make faces. You spit it out. All right, so this is not a pleasant thing. This is something Moses is saying, hey, look, you got something wrong here, and there's a penalty to be paid. And then what follows is one of my all-time favorite confrontations in Scripture, because Moses goes to Aaron, his brother, the guy Moses had kind of left in charge, and he said, what is going on? What did these people do? What have you done to let these people sin like this? And Aaron kind of begs forgiveness. He says, don't be angry. They came, they said you weren't coming back, and didn't know what to do. And so I kind of told them to give me their gold, and I took the gold and I just shoved it in the fire, and oh, this calf came out. And you're like, how completely ridiculous, Aaron. My 5-year-old niece can come up with a better story than that, right? Yeah, you know kids, they can come up with a better story, but this is the story Aaron tells him. And we're like, how ridiculous is that? But doesn't that illustrate for us how ridiculous our reasons or our excuses are that we give to God? When we get impatient, waiting for Him to make things come into being, and we take things into our own hands. Or when we get impatient, living life God's way, living the holy, righteous life, and we get impatient, not getting to where we want to get so fast, and so we give God excuses. And meanwhile, we're out, we still go to church, and we do all the church stuff, but, well, some stuff in our lives just has to be the way we want it to be, right? Because that's what everyone else is doing, right? We're impatient with God's way. We're going to do what everyone else is doing. Everyone else says I should be able to do this, so I'm going to do it. And sure, I follow 8 of the commandments. I only break 2. That's all that the Israelites broke. And we have our reasons. And we kind of give excuses. But our reasons for doing so sound as stupid to God as Aaron's excuse is to Moses, saying, I put gold in the fire and out came this calf. As you see, for the Israelites, the question is, are you really going to do everything the way God says? Or are you going to become impatient with that? It's the same question for us as followers of Jesus. Are we really going to live our lives fully according to what Jesus says? Or do we become impatient with that and do things our way? See, for the Israelites, there is a price to be paid when they become impatient. Moses, he sees the revelry going on, and what he saw, I don't know. Probably don't want to know. But he realized it must be stopped. And he shouts at the entrance of the camp, whoever is for the Lord, come to me. And the Levites rallied to his side. There were 12 tribes that made up the people of Israel, and the Levites were one of the tribes. And apparently, they hadn't been fully on board with this idol worship and this revelry. So when God's servant Moses calls, they're ready to stand beside him. They're there and ready to serve God. And Moses tells them, get a sword and just go through the camp, forward and backwards, and kill people. I start killing people, and that's what the Levites do. And 3,000 people are killed. And apparently this finally gets the people's attention. And the idolatry and the wild living, it stops after they've paid the price. Now, lest you think that God, he must be just wicked to kill these 3,000 people. Remember that God is the judge of all. He knows the hearts of all men. He knows the hearts of these people, and he knows that they were far from him. Now or later, whenever they die, whenever they are killed, they're going to die apart from him. And so rather than waiting for judgment, he brings it right now. They die apart from God. See, when we get impatient, living life fully God's way, or not waiting for him to work things out in his own time, there are consequences in our life and in the church. Let's be honest, too often we lose patience with God and his time and his way. And if we're not careful, we start to think, well, I know a better way. I know a better way of living, a better way of doing things. And we start ignoring God's call in our lives and the things God calls us to do, and he wants us to do these things over here. And we say, no, I can't do it because I think this is better. Or I'm tired of waiting for you, God, or doing things your way, so I'm going to do such and such. And we can't do what he calls us to then. And that becomes our idol. That becomes our golden calf. That becomes what we are living for. That becomes what we worship. Sure, we continue to come to church and to Sunday school and to small group and the various different things we do to serve God through the church, but our lives really are not centered on God. Just because you come to church doesn't mean your life is centered on God. We say, I don't really have to put God first. I really don't have to live all my life his way. My way is better. Now, most of us, you're sitting there you're thinking, I would never say that. And we don't say that or even think that fully, but subconsciously, that might be what's going on. What do our lives and how we live them say? That's the more important question. I want you to think about your life. Today, what are you living for? What are you striving for? What is your goal in life? Is it God? Is it for His glory? Or is it something else? Have you lost patience with God's view of things and therefore embraced your own? What is God doing in your life that you are resisting, in your church, in your community, in your world? What is God calling you to do that you are ignoring? You know what? The reason we resist God and the reason we ignore God's call in our lives is because we've lost patience with His plan, and we've kind of substituted our own right in there. And we say, this is how I need to be living my life. This is how things should be going. So we've lost patience with God. And that has become our idol. And right now, God is calling you out on that. He's saying, hey, remember, no other gods but me. Why are you resisting? Why are you ignoring me? And when God comes to you with those questions, you might have answers. You might have your reasons. But to God, when we resist Him, when we ignore Him, our reasons, our answers are just excuses. And they are as silly to Him as Aaron telling Moses he put gold into a furnace and out came a calf. So it's time to be done with that. What part of your life? Is it your attitude? Is it your lifestyle? Is it how you treat your material possessions? What part of your life have you decided, hey, I'm going to live on my own terms because you weren't patient enough to do it God's way, because you weren't patient enough to live it out and wait for God to do it? It's time to throw that into the furnace and then crush it into dust. Be done with it. Turn instead with patience to God's way of life. Patiently wait for God to work things out. And follow Him in full obedience. Do what He wants you to do as you're waiting. And He will bring fulfillment to your life. I'll close with just a promise from the Scriptures. Psalm 37, verse 34. It's funny because this was part of my weekly Bible readings this week. As I was preparing this message, here it is. God gives this to us. He says, wait for the Lord and keep His way. He will exalt you to inherit the land. When the wicked are cut off, you will see it. You will see it if we wait for the Lord and keep His way. Let's pray.